Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in with our talk with Daniel. I wanted to introduce our great friend, Brian Emmanuel Gray. And I also wanted to explain the little change we had in the program. And that was that Daniel called earlier, and he was just back from a trip to Mexico. And he was just really still inspired by his trip to Prague. And rather than talk about his near-death experience, he said, I really just want to share this moment of patriotism and spiritual freedom. And he said, if I could just do this talk a little bit later with Brian, that would be my first choice because I feel called upon by the masters to get this message out. So we had about a 25-minute talk with Daniel, and I hope that if you weren't here live for it, you'll be able to hear it as a recording. It was really inspirational and very unifying. And so now we have our great friend Brian. And we really are interested to hear what Brian has to say because he's one of the few people on the earth that has actually passed beyond the veil and brought back conscious memory of what it's like, and we're interested in hearing spiritual solutions that came to him. And along with the other people that have recorded near-death experiences, I think what happens, from what I've learned, is that you get a very holistic view of life, and people can come back with a vibration of the heavenly world that they can share with us. So we're really interested in hearing what he has to say today, and we're really grateful you could all be with us here and on the broadcast. And I'm going to let Michael say a few words as well.
Yeah, just a couple. And I just wanted to say this about Brian and my experience with Brian is that people who have these near-death experiences are often gifted with spiritual sight. Some people who have this sight are not at the same time real Chilas as a brotherhood. And I just want to bear witness to Brian's Chilaship and never-ending work, really, to bring the brotherhood's teachings forward. And for that, we're all very, very grateful. So, without further ado, oh, Chila and brother mine, thank you.
Well, thank you, Paula. Thank you, Michael. It's one of these things where following Daniel, somebody who's had a series of near-death experiences and NDEs and a series of OBEs, which is out-of-body experiences. Following somebody like him, it's one of these things where the big dog's already barked, and so I'm a bit of a chihuahua, and so but that's okay because it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. That's what Grandpa says. And so, what happens is that these are these things where essentially death is always seen as a bit of a mystery, and people are always, one way or the other, interested in this stuff. And when I was coming home from Canada, I was just up in Canada visiting with my family. And this town, so I'm from this really tiny, tiny place up in the flat plains and up in Saskatchewan. And so because there's so few people in every town, they basically bus all the towns to a central town, and then you go to high school in this one town. And so there's this town, 1, 2, 3, 4 towns away from ours, and yet I went to school with all these people in this little town. And I'm on my way back to the United States, and so I'm driving past this town where I'd partied and went to many dances in many times, and I'm driving by, or I'm coming up to it just around the curve, and somebody had pulled out and was hit by a half-ton truck, right, just before I got there. And so the police had just arrived, and one of the locals had brought out a blue tarp and covered the vehicles because it was a wipeout. And as I was driving by, and of course we were told and trained that when you see something of this sort of magnitude, you say, "In the name of my mighty iron presence and holy Christ self, I call to you, beloved Jesus, beloved Archangel Michael, beloved Mother Mary, to come forth and to take command and control of every facet and aspect of this situation." And it was such an interesting thing because I was making the call, and the call I give is see to it that no blood spilt will be used for any negative energies whatsoever, that this place be sealed from astral forces that would move in on that stuff. And it sounds creepy, but anyway, so let it be. And but as I was making the call, right, it was this thing where the thought came up, what if it was, because people in these little towns, they either move away or they stay there. And so what if it was somebody I went to high school with? What if it was this girl I dated? And I was like, And so just for a moment I had this hesitation, and then I was like, oh, that's my carnal mind. Because even if somebody has, and we know that my mom told me, she followed me up or down to Montana, and she said that both people in that car were killed, right? And I was like, I've already been dead. I know what happens. And of all the time, there's somebody who knows about the masters, who knows about the calls, who knows about death, that these people had me drive by right at that moment. And there they are, knocked out of their bodies, and they're right there, and they're standing there just in shock, right? And so with a quick read, I was like, oh no, this isn't anyone that I know from the point of view of my own human personal experience, of my life. And so I just made the calls, and depending on exactly how the karma goes, the angels come and they're taken to a place of light, rather than just simply in this netherworld of confusion. And so a lot of the work that we do out of the body at night, which is out of body experience, is to help people who have left their body, but they don't exactly know what to do because they're too young as souls to know exactly what to do. And so we're going to be talking about all sorts of stuff like this, where near-death experience, and which is NDEs, and OBEs, out-of-body experiences, are not Disneyland. I mean, they have a glitz and a sort of, aura of mystery about them. But in the end, what happens is that it's just an awakening, and that awakening allows an expansion of work that you're doing all the time. And literally, there's a certain amount of responsibility that goes along with the thing. And so when I was told that we were going to be doing this thing, and I really liked the format where Paula was going to interview Daniel and I, and so I wouldn't have to come up with what I was going to say. I would just answer what was asked, right? And it's an interesting thing that, so when I was 2.5 months old, I basically had what was called in those days crib death. They now call it SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And so what happens is that the story goes, it was my mom's first, going to go out after baby being born and looking after. And so my grandmother comes with her friend, and they're sitting there while baby's sleeping, and they're playing cards, crib. I don't know if you know what crib is, but cribbage. And the story goes that I got from my grandmother was she was playing cards, and all of a sudden she went, "Oh my God, the baby," right? Just without even knowing what it was that she was actually doing. And she gets up and goes into the bedroom, takes me out of the crib, and so she said that I was purple and blue, and she said she picked me up and she shook me, shouting my name, Brian, Brian. And so the baby specialist said that her thumbs happened to have gotten right in the right place in the middle of my chest and basically pumped me up. And she said that, and she had my grandmother had 9 children One of them didn't survive, but so she had 8 children, or 9 births. And so she knew what, and she said it was just like a baby being born, right? Where that first breath goes in and that purple and blue just goes pink, that the pink just went from the center out. And I started to cry and was back, right? And so, of course, they took me to the hospital, and the baby specialist said, sorry, but most likely you're going to have rubber baby, right? Because the baby has been without oxygen far too long, and there was various ideas of estimates and stuff, but it was a long time. And so what happens is that they expected, that I would be a brain-injured child as a result of the oxygen deprivation. But what happened was so I basically started to walk when I was 9 months old, but I was saying my first words at 8 months old, right? Horse was my first word. Horse, right? My second word was bugum, which is bubble gum. And so, I had my priorities already right there. But when I started to, and so this was a great relief to the people that I was, my motor activity was, I was crawling, and I actually didn't crawl. They said I went from basically sliding to walking, and it's because of the damage to the corpus callosum that I lacked the cross crawl pattern. And I used to get killed when we were kids playing war, because I couldn't get down and crawl like the rest of these guys and go, pow, pow, I got you. So I'd always get hit. But anyways, and so what happens is that as soon as I could start to string words together, and I was stringing them together pretty good by the time I was 3 years old, right? And I remember just vaguely talking about the situation of the pink blanket, right, with the family when I was about 3. But by the time I was 4, I was telling them, look, when I was dead, this lady came and she took me and put me in a pink blanket and took me to this place where I was shown all these things, taught all these things. And even though it was within a very short time, right, which, maximum of 15 minutes, to my experience, it was almost like a month of compressed experience, right? And what I was taught and what I was shown, and the way I was taught it and the way I was shown it, I have been reticent to speak about, and so when I had this pressure, sort of, okay, Daniel and you are going to talk about near-death experience, right? And you're going to have question and answer. All these years that I have, mentioned to people I've had near-death experience, and that the archetypes and all of that stuff was given to me at that really early formative age, I've never actually ever told the story. And so it's kind of a funny thing, where I was never given to tell the story, because it was, the byword is to know, to dare, to do, and to be silent, right? And when somebody has something sort of unusual happen to them and they express it, there's a tendency, and because the expression of the thing will stimulate memories within the auric field of other people of their passing previously, they get very interested and curious of the individual who's going to say something like that. Now, the dweller will react as well, which is, get away from that crazy guy. But there's the other, if the dweller can't get you to go away from that guy who's going to talk about these things that have happened to us all thousands of times. We've all lived thousands of times before, and we've all died thousands of times before. It's not big, strange stuff. But when somebody actually has it and comes back and can have a cognitive record and understanding and memory of it, it stimulates an antipathy or a sympathy within the person's system. Okay, so antipathy is where the dweller says, stay away from the nut job, right? Sympathy is where the dweller can't get them to get away from you, so the dweller gets them to idolatrize the person who's had that experience. And that is, both of them are wrong, right? Because somebody who's had near-death experience is just the same as everybody, because we've all had near-death experience, right? The key is, what was that near-death experience for? When one of these very key people who was very close to Mother found out that I'd had near-death experience and OBEs, he said, well, the reason why you had those is because, you're like Thomas, the Apostle Thomas. He said, you had to have them. You had to have them, right? And I was like, oh, okay. And he said, because, I wouldn't believe until I was able to put my fingers in the holes. And I think that he was right. He may have said it a little aggressively, and he may have said it with a certain amount of chastising in it. Now, I didn't. It was mentioned secondhand, and from somebody to finally getting to this individual, and I wasn't bragging about it. It was just something that I ended up saying to somebody, and I was very used to this throughout my life. I have received serious rebuke for discussing my near-death experience, right? When I was 4 years old, my mom said, you have to stop talking about this stuff, right? You have to stop talking about it because, people are going to think you're... And besides, you can't remember. You were an infant. And I said, when I was dead, I was a grown-up, right? And it was a very strange thing, because this lady in this very sort of 50s outfit, it was just a creamy white outfit. I pop out of the shell. And so this is what I'm given to teach today. And I have been so reticent about teaching this, but so what happens is that each one of us is enclosed in an ovoid that looks very much like a cloud, right? In the old days, they called it the veil or the mist. This ovoid that's around us is like a cocoon of our self-concern, our thoughts about ourselves and our feeling about ourselves, and the circumstances in which those thoughts and feelings could possibly play out. And it is really a sarcophagus. We're buried in this thing. And so back then, when I had popped out of my body and the lady came with the pink blanket and took me up into this place, and the next thing you know, I'm no longer baby. I'm who I am. And I was taught about the different levels of consciousness. I was taught about this egg of reflecting self-concern that is actually the thing that keeps us from being aware. When Gautama said, I am awake, and they say the veil was torn asunder, it is when that cloud deck that we have circling around us of personal self-concern is gone, and that the center of our focused consciousness is no longer on our personal wants and desires, but are on what it is that God, who's the closest embodiment to us in that moment, which could be our Holy Christ self, it could be Mother Mary, it could be whoever, right? But we have to understand that as long as the center of our circle is our person, we are in a place where we will have that ovoid around us. Now, I was shown that there are methodologies for basically removing this veil that's around us. And that there's one methodology that is used by the black magicians. And it's a very important thing to understand that there are certain negative ceremonial behaviors that you can do to open that veil up. And when that occurs, and you're able to see beyond the hologram that's here, you can see all these little passageways, and you can read people's electronic belt in their subconscious and go, okay, so, this person here at age 0 to 3 years of age, when they projected God onto their parents, it's right within their astral body that what they always wanted dad or mom to do was this. And then you go and offer that to that person. And you can literally have that person go, oh, finally, somebody's going to give me what I always wanted. And that is an extraordinarily powerful enslaving mechanism of what's called mentalist mind control, right? You don't want to engage in reading people's 0 to 3 file in their subconscious, in their astral body, and find what they want the most, and then dangle it in front of them and get them chasing you. But that's exactly what these black magicians have learned, how through these ceremonies to rip that thing open, be able to see outside of the hologram that all of us think is so real here. And every time, I remember when Daniel was talking the last time in our Reunion of Hearts group, he's up there talking, and suddenly a crash of thunder occurs, and he's like, because of course he was killed by lightning hitting the phone line and going into his head. And so in our subconscious is 0 to 3 file in our subconscious is the thing we always wanted our parents to tell us and to do with us and to be with us. And then there's the thing we were terrified that they would do. And so this is the good cop and the bad cop of our subconscious 0 to 3 file, where we projected this power of God onto our parents. By the time we were 2, we doubted their God status, but we extended it to about age 3. And so what happens is that there is this methodology that can be done, and it's a left-handed path methodology of opening this veil, and it's for nothing more than literally refalling on that 3 o'clock line of Aries of God control for ego control, right? I mean, what's the point of being able to open this thing up just to herd people around and milk them of their time and energy, right? I mean, what's the point of that? Well, you can make lots of money, you can have nice big cars and nice big houses, and if you're a guy, lots of gals, and lots of self-medicating things. But in the end, what's it for? Well, it's a tricky thing. And so there's that methodology. And we don't go that pathway, right, of doing these sort of weird things. But you can actually part the veil and actually pop out and be able to see what's really going on energetically in any scenario. And because people are taking the surface of what's happening as real, you just simply navigate through all of the energy pattern and basically set up all the little landmines before the people even get there. And then you herd them into a narrowing corral of idol worship of your human personality. And I've seen it over and over. So there's this other methodology, which is, and I hope Daniel will forgive me for this, but for years, and it's absolutely true, I've never talked about this, right? Right? Anybody, you guys have been with I've never discussed this before today. And so, but I've had it in my head, and not even with Caroline, who I tell everything to. So I call it the jarhead methodology. Okay, so does anyone know what a jarhead is? What is it? A Marine. That's right. A Marine. It's a nickname. It's a name that's given to a certain order of military men, okay, in the military. And so people who have had many incarnations in military circumstances, who have been literally knocked out of the body in a very abrupt fashion, okay, right, have a certain, shall we say, flexibility within this field of energy. And there's everything is karma, of course, right? So Danny is going to go, well, because I wasn't there, he talked about me. Or no, he wouldn't say that. But so what happens is that people who have had these very serious impacts on themselves in past lives over and over, like being, in a trench and a bomb comes in and or being jabbed with a spear and or being hit in the head with a bullet or whatever, it knocks you out of your body so very quickly, right? And it creates this sort of, shall we say, permeability. Well, what happens is that, and it sets up a karma. So what happens is that people who have had the jarhead method of opening the field often have either a heart attack and they pop out, right? And then they pump them back up and they come in. And it's quite when you have a heart attack, it's a bit of a jarring scenario. And this is what happened with my grandfather, who was, for all intents and purposes, an atheist. And so he has a heart attack literally as 3 EMTs are coming down the stairs. He has a heart attack right in front of them. And the one had an amulet with nitroglycerin, and they put it under his tongue and pumped him up, and he came back into the body. And so he's in the intensive care unit, and so finally the family's allowed to go in. And so we walk in, and so here's the family, and he's the patriarch, and everybody's very scared of Grandpa, right? And so we all walk in there, and here's Grandpa. He's got his heart attack and all of that, and he looks up and he sees us, and he's awake, and he goes, out, right? So he just had a heart attack, right? He looks up at us coming in. He goes, out. And so we're like, slinking out, the Godfather has spoken. And he says, not you, pointing to me, right? And so I go, oh boy, the eldest son of the eldest son of the eldest son, crap rolls downhill. And so whatever is going to happen is going to be me, and then the pyramid out to the rest of the family. And so I'm just like, okay, and he sees everybody, coast is clear, everybody's gone, and he says, remember when you were a kid and you kept telling us about when you were dead? And I was like, oh boy, right? Because, right, he's going to say, I was dead. They brought me back, and there's nothing there, you know, and I was just, so I was like, you know, and it's hard to describe exactly how this worked within my family. The thing that happened to me and the various things that I was able to see and perceive and understand, ghosts and when people had the light out in their face and stuff. On one hand, my family overtly denied that any of this stuff was going on. But covertly, like my grandmother would say, well, you know, does Mrs. Earnshaw have light in her face today? You know, and all of that stuff. And so it was kind of a funny thing where on one hand, it was an embarrassment, and I had to keep it to myself. On the other hand, right, I would get told, well, so-and-so died. I still have that happen, where people phone me up and say, so-and-so died, because I make the call. And then at night when I'm sleeping, sometimes I'll have to actually go and do a visitation. All of that's something else. But anyways, the point here is that even now I still feel it. I feel an embarrassment about talking about this stuff, right? Because it is, you know, sort of, you know, it's a thing where I can say this stuff and you guys can say, I wonder if that's true or not, right? And there's you know, and so it's just what it is, right? Whatever it is what it is. You put it on the shelf, you say to God, bless it or block it. If it's crap, out. If there's something in it that is going to be helpful, well, you know, leaven the lump into something that's mine rather than something this guy said. Anyways, and so I'm there, and Grandpa says, remember when you were a kid and he kept saying about what happened when you were dead? And I was like, yeah. And he says, wasn't it wonderful? And he grabbed himself, right? And he held himself. Wasn't it wonderful? And I know I'd never heard him say that word before. Right? Wonderful. I know I'd never heard him ever say the word wonderful in my whole life. Right? And so I'm just like, you know, Grandpa's had the thing. And, you know, he's going to want to hug me or something now. And it's a little bit like, you know, having a pet alligator. You love him, but you got to be careful because he bites. And so, you know, it was one of these things where I was like, oh, yeah. And so it, on one hand, it's an experience that people can talk about and then people can hear about. But no words ever give it justice. No words ever can convey this moment of coming out of the physical prison house that our body is. I'm sorry. You know, this is why I didn't want to talk about this stuff. Right? You know, I tell you that our physical body is such a confining space that, you know, after I'd received all this instruction about how this auric, and it's really this, it's the, what in Hinduism it's called kama manas. In English we say carnal mind. So our human conscious mind is influenced by our subconscious mind. And so that when we make decisions at the conscious level that are based on our past experience that we have stored in the subconscious, that we are a result of everything that we have encountered mentally, emotionally, and physically in this life, right? That subconscious comes up as a fight, flight, survival mechanism and says, this person reminds you of Cousin Ernie. Cousin Ernie was a jerk, punch him in the mouth. Now, you're not even seeing the person that you're talking to because you're projecting Cousin Ernie out onto that person. And it gets really crazy because simultaneously, just as this guy reminds you of Cousin Ernie, you remind them of Cousin Eddie, who they didn't like. And the next thing you know, these two masks of projecting onto each other start to fight with each other, and you are hostage just as the other person's hostage, and you don't even know it. You think that those two projections on each other are your real selves. And you think that the violence between those two projections is real. And it is real, especially if you pop them in the head or you get popped in the head yourself. And so when we're taught out of the body, we're taught in these extraordinarily complex spherical glyphs. And these glyphs are so as I mentioned before, that the masters will actually, though they're on the upper level of the etheric plane. So there's the basic etheric plane, or the lower level of the etheric plane, and then there's the upper level of the etheric plane. So the etheric cities, there's 14 cities in the etheric plane that are over the 14 seas and the 7 seas and the 7 deserts, is what the way it was put to us, or the teachings have said. They are on the lower level of the etheric, these 14 cities, and a golden age is already happening there. And this golden age is so that at the lower etheric, where these cities are happening, they are still in the process, even though it's a golden age there, they're still in a process of realizing themselves. And the only rule that's there that they have is respect. That if you respect yourself enough, you will not impose on another person. That's the only law in the etheric cities. If you respect yourself enough, you will not impose on others. I mean, it's a pretty simple law, isn't it? It's a law of self-respect. And so in the upper etheric, or in theosophy, they call it the super etheric, whatever you want to call it, is where the masters' retreats are. And the masters' retreats in the super etheric, the masters actually come in and they condense sometimes they keep their old etheric body like Saint Germain did, and even these other bodies. I won't go into Christian Rosenkreuz. Okay, so let's just go on, and we'll say that so just like we're here in our physical body, but our minds are functioning on a mental plane, right? So the masters are at that super etheric level, but their minds function, right, in what's called the arupa level of the Christic plane. And that's a 5-dimensional reality. Now, they can go on up into the Buddhic, into the Atmic, depending on whatever, but they essentially lower themselves down to the arupa level of the Christic plane, so that when they build these glyphs, it's reachable to us. And they build them in a 3-dimensional reality, because the etheric is a 3-dimensional place. And so we go there, and as I said, they're like Michelangelos. When they paint, because it's not like thinking, and it's not like writing. It's sort of like musical painting with fire. I don't know how else to describe these glyphs. It's like musical painting with fire. You've got color, you've got depth, you've got breadth, you've got sequential logic, but then you have this place where they can take the entire symphony, the 9th symphony, and hear it in a single note. Right? I mean, it's not such an easy thing to really talk about. And yes, it is understandable. And so what I was taught in this time, when I was a child, baby, was that each of us must learn to part the veil of this mist, this curtain, this cloud deck around us of self-concern, of self-centeredness. And it has to be done in such a way that it is as an unfolding rose. Because if you rip it open, then so if you're of the light and you have a soul and a threefold flame, right, then you're reaping your karma. But if you are not of the light, you can rip that thing open because you're not reaping. Fallen angels don't reap their karma. They bank it for that moment when they have to go before the dais and the great central sun, before Papa and Mama. Because that's who they are. You know, we say Alpha and Omega, Father, Mother, God. It's Papa and Mama, I tell you. And so, so what happens is that they can through their ceremonies rip the thing open, and because they don't reap their karma, they can just orchestrate. But if we crack this thing open before we are, shall we say, unfolded and matured to the thing, we then get overwhelmed with the karmic pattern that we have to deal with. And essentially, there's so many different ways to look at this. Essentially, to make it understandable here, it's what's called an undue kundalini movement, where the kundalini blows up through the spinal stalk into a chamber that you have not yet mastered. And suddenly, all of the stuff that is a challenge within that chamber, so it's like suddenly you're in grade 3 in school, and suddenly you have to go to grade 12 classes. It can be extremely confusing and all of that stuff. Anyways, and so what was I saying? It was so there was the wrong way to do it, and then the jarhead method, and then the third method that I want to describe is the one that they showed me, which is through knowing yourself. Okay, so it does seem like it's antithetical, because the problem with this cocoon around us is because of self-concern, right? So it's sort of like we're going to break out of this particular hypnosis of self-concern by paying attention to ourselves, which is, and so the methodology is, of course, to be able to start to know that what we think, right, is not who we are, right? That we are not our mental bodies and we are not our thoughts. Our thoughts are simply vehicles of interchange of energy, of ideas. But literally, people who are stuck in this sarcophagus, this cocoon, they have their thoughts and then they feed back on them. And literally, people think that the thoughts they're having are themselves. Now, this extends to our emotional bodies, right? That people think that they're their feelings, when in fact the emotional body is just simply an interface point, the way we exchange a particular energy with the world and the world back to us, the same as our thoughts. So we are not our thoughts, we are not our feelings, and then finally we are not our physical bodies. No matter how much my Achilles tendon hurts because I basically yanked it at Firehole, and when I jumped in, so all these young guys are jumping from this rock down into the stream, and so I'm like, having a midlife crisis, and I decide I'm going to go and jump from the rock like the young guys. So I go and jump from the thing. I go down, and my left foot jams into underneath a rock, and because I've got river shoes on, my heel just goes like that, locks in, and then the current takes me. So now I'm under the water with my leg jammed in a rock, my foot jammed in the rock, and it's dragging me downstream. And I have to grab onto this leg under the water and pull myself up and get my foot out, right? And so while I'm down there, I'm like going, looks like I might die, right? So, it's sort of a been there, done that. This may be the one, folks. Look out, Elizabeth, I'm coming to see you. That's Sanford and Son, but it's also another Elizabeth. that we're talking about here. Anyways, I was trying to do Danny in a bit. So, and so the point here is that that we have to basically get to know. The methodology they gave me was to define your way of being self-centered, the limitation that you incarnated through with the type of story you were told about yourself from 0 to 3 years of age. When we were born to our parents, we were spherical. Anyone ever look at an infant when they're first born? Where are they looking? They're looking everywhere. They're spherical. The minute that we start to be able to think and interface and cognize, this little spherical being says to Dad, I just want to be helpful, right? Does anyone remember? I just want to be helpful. So we say to Mom, I just want to be helpful, right? And so Dad and Mom in Canada, Mom in America, Dad says, oh, you want to be helpful? Piece of cake. We're going to take that little spherical intention that you've got and hone it down into a single tunnel of how you can be helpful. In other words, when I said to Dad, I want to be helpful, he thought I meant helpful to him and his particular psychodrama. And so suddenly this spherical intention of being helpful, the little child shall lead them, is now that spherical field collapses into this is how you interface, right? If you want to be helpful to Dad, this is how you do it. Right? You want to be helpful to Mom, this is how you do it. So if I said to Dad, I just want to be helpful, right? He says, oh, that's great. Piece of cake. You want to be helpful? Don't make any noise. Don't get in the way of anything. Just stay over there and be quiet, right? And so I'm invisible. You can't see me. And so with Mom, it's like, oh, yes, you want to be helpful? Well, then just be my shining star. Be this larger-than-life character. As I said, I could speak quite young, right? And so my mom would dress me up in a little suit and put me up on the table in the booth at our local cafe, and I would sing. I have Leo Rising, right? I have Leo Rising. I don't know if you guys know what that means. And so there's all these stories of me just as this little tiny guy with a little suit. And I actually have a photograph of it, And I would sing, I'm a Little Teapot. Rotten Robert is my uncle. That's his nickname, Rotten Robert. And so you wouldn't know it was his nickname because everybody calls him Rotten Robert. And I wonder how he got that nickname. Well, so Rotten Robert, every time he would get loaded on whatever particular medication, he would come up to me and he'd say, do a little teapot for us. And so, he was the youngest son of a large family, and he was the pet of my dad's family. So he's the youngest of my mom's family and the pet of my dad's family. And so suddenly a grandchild is born to both families, and he's now... So Rotten had some trouble with that. But anyways, and so the key here is that I was shown that this is a legitimate way to part this veil by finding out how it is that we are in a habitual limitation based on this deal we cut with our parents so that we would behave in a certain way and be helpful in a certain way for the rest of our lives, sacrificing our spherical ability into these two patterns of superiority and or inferiority, right? So if I act from my dad's position, I'm superior. I walk around going, and my dad had it really simple. Do what I say or I'll punch you in the mouth, right? Dad was a pretty serious character. He was My father is Native American, and so and it was a pretty rough place for somebody like that. And he was alcoholic, and he died actually of cirrhosis. And so, whereas my mom is just this, I don't know how else to describe her, as just the most wonderful sort of mother that you could kind of ask for, just, just long-term, long-haul, whatever. But also with the expectation that you're going to be the next baby Jesus. So, it's a little bit tricky because that would make her Mother Mary. And so the point here is that that it really is the methodology of man, know thyself, meaning know your limitation, and from that limitation, set it aside and know thyself as God. Okay? That's where that goes. And so that particular methodology is one that is there for us. And it's legitimate. So the jarhead one is legitimate because if you get hit in the head by lightning, or you have a heart attack, or you die in your crib of crib death, it knocks you out of your egg. And for a minute that veil parts, and then you come out and you have this experience. And the problem is that people who have this, that when they go back into their body, that veil closes again, and there's a tendency to interpret everything through the pattern of self-deception that you've got, right? So there's a lot of people who have had near-death experience and immediately take that spherical glyph that basically is a three-dimensional experience, and then unwrap it and run it through their carnal mind interpretation. So if you have somebody who's a Hindu who has second death, their system will boot it up as meeting Vishnu or Lakshmi or whoever. If they're a Buddhist, they'll bump into Kuan Yin, or if they're Christian, they'll meet Jesus or whatever. And so it's tricky business, because you actually have to be an old enough soul that if you pop out and you are cognitively aware, that you don't, when you come back in and the veil closes again, that you don't literally project an orthodoxy onto the experience. And regardless of the fact that some people have done that, the experience when a person telegraphs it, like Betty Eadie, right? She, to a certain extent, defined her through her her event through her Catholicism, but it's a tremendous book regardless. And by the way, if my best friend, my best buddy Dan, who was an altar boy and a Catholic, hadn't been there, I might not even be here. Catholicism saved me, and it was my start, right? And my buddy Dan, he goes, you won't believe. He says, come on, let's go up in the loft. I got to tell you what the priest told us today in catechism. And he said, get this. He said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so, I'm like 5, and I'm like, ka-ching, that slips into my head. And he said it with such earnestness. He was 6 and I'm 5, and he's like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I was just, ka-ching, that was it. You got it. And so that worked for us for a long time, until we found out when we were reading the local newspaper that he and I are both Aries, right? And so we read in there Aries and the quality of Aries. And so suddenly we went from being very good boys who were very helpful to, hey, we're both Aries. That gives us a right to stick our boot up somebody's anyways. And so we became difficult at that moment. And we blamed it on the bossa nova, of course. And so the point here is that that we find out our limitation to get rid of it. That's the point. And that's a legitimate pathway, and we have been given this in the previous 25,800 year cycle that we just went through, that we can do it through action, right action, which is karma yoga, union with God through action, or we can do it through the pathway of jnana yoga, or union with God through wisdom, or we can do it through bhakti yoga, which is union with God through devotion or love. And these three are valid. But what I was given as this in this time was that there was going to be this massive awakening, and that we have to be able, in this time that's coming, to be able to have a, what's the word, rapprochement. What is that? What does that mean? Coming together, rapprochement. Coming together with each type, that we have to have that pathway pattern in us so that we don't have an antithetical response to somebody that God's going to send to us because they're not walking the particular pathway of union with God that we have a habituated history with from past lives. That we have to have all three of these cylinders firing so that the flock that will come to the shepherd who's coming upon us, which is our own Holy Christ Self and sponsoring Master, that we don't have a sour note for those who simply represent our lowest plume and the way that we do not believe is proper for union with God, because it's our lowest plume and we've had pain there. And the truth is, and I was going to say that earlier, and I was like, well, whatever, is that when we start to raise our lowest plume, right, in our threefold flame, because we're working out the various aspects of our psychology, and so if our lowest plume is the blue plume, then what happens is that we raise that plume up by holding strong our tallest plume. So for me, my blue plume is my lower plume. I have a tall pink plume. My secondary is yellow. So I have to hold strong to that pink plume and do things with love, and then bring this thing up. But when I bring up the blue plume, an extraordinary thing occurs, that blue plume is held basically, as Therese said, because of things we've done, down. But it's also true that if you bring up your lower plume, all of the stuff that's in the repression of that plume will start to act through you in that moment. Right? You start to have the thoughts and the feelings that are so very powerful, and they go out to this cocoon and feed right back to us. And literally we're going, okay, so I'm going to bring up this lower plume, but the minute I do that, I behave worse than if I just stay in my core competency in my tall plume. And plus, because people are watching me and people are looking to me to have some answers, if I goof up, so I have I have to stay strong and people are watching, I'm supposed to be a shepherd. And so it's a very difficult sort of thing to be able to discharge this energy that seems to be our thoughts and feelings when it comes up as a result of activating that lower plume, and to have it so that when we misbehave and people see us, that we discharge it as a humbling rather than a humiliation, no matter what the people say, no matter what is happening out there as a result of us goofing up, right? We say to ourselves, humiliation comes from pride. Pride comes from the fallen angels. Humbling comes from Christ. Christ said, through my great weakness, I can do nothing. Through my great weakness comes my great strength, for I know I can do nothing but through the Father who has sent me. Right?